In the introduction, we will begin with some definitions of certain things that need to happen for you to nail the interview. We'll start in this section by just covering the basics, and in the next section, I'll introduce you to scarcity principle, which will be important not because you need to understand a lot of psychology, but you do need to understand what's going to happen to you in the interview process, and you don't want to fall victim to that. So we'll discuss that in the next section. So let's start with why listen to me. Well, first of all, I've conducted hundreds of interviews. I've seen what works, I've seen what doesn't work, I've seen what my preferences are, what my preferences aren't. But on top of that, I've invested time in processes, hiring processes specifically around behavioral interviewing, which helps companies hire better. And now my goal is to help you turn that around and basically do the behavioral interview for the candidate to the company and kind of even the playing field. This will make more sense once we cover scarcity principle in the next section, but I've conducted so many interviews and I can tell you what definitely works and what definitely doesn't, and just sidestepping the nonsense will help you improve your game with how you go about your interview processes today with companies, and it'll make you stand out. So what does manifest mean? Let's cover the things that absolutely get you eliminated the quickest. This is the easily understood or recognized by the mind, and it's what's obvious. And so I'm going to say these things, but it's amazing to me that after I say these, you're going to be like, well, you don't need to say that. But I do, because I can't tell you how many times in an interview that I've conducted, somebody doesn't follow these steps. So first and foremost, check your resume for misspellings and grammar. This is the easiest way to get eliminated. This is representing you, and if you can't take the time to just spell check and grammar check your resume, this is the easiest way for a company to eliminate you just in the application process. They're just not going to take you seriously because you can't even conduct a simple check. Have somebody else check it, you check it, make sure it's accurate. And check your resume for what I'm going to refer to as lies, but my experience is this is not always the case. There are people who absolutely lie and knowingly do so on their resume. But what I find more often than not is somebody's embellished something on their resume and then they never went back, and especially when they're younger, and they never went back and fixed it. Fix your resume. Make it accurate. You don't need to lie. I promise you're not losing a job over what you lied about on your resume, unless you're just embellishing that you can do all these things. Kind of like the joke that actors always say they can speak French or ride horses or whatever they have to do to get a role, and then they just figure it out once they get the job. You don't want to be caught in that. This is the easiest way to get terminated after hiring, is to find out there's something that's glaringly wrong on your resume. You just don't want to be in a position where you have to sit down in somebody's office across the table from them and have this conversation about, tell me about what happened here. It's a very sinking feeling that you just don't need to be caught in. So let's talk about a bad interview. What is a bad interview? The best way I can describe a good and bad interview is to use a cocktail party. If you've ever gone to a party at somebody's house and you've had a conversation with somebody, when you walked away, was it a good conversation or a bad conversation? The interviews are very much the same. A bad interview is they ask, you answer next. Whether you've been on the receiving end or the giving end of a bad conversation at a cocktail party, it will look like this. I ask a question, you give me an answer, and then there's no follow-up, there's no reversal of questions, there's no conversation in it. It's I ask, you answer, or you ask, I answer. It tells you that the other party's really not interested, is what it does in a conversation at a cocktail party. And it's very similar to an interview. So any questions at the end? This is always shocking to me. I can't tell you how many interviews I've conducted where I ask any questions and nope, I'm good. I don't have any questions. It again tells me you're not as interested in my company as I'm possibly in you. And if I don't know what questions are driving you, I can't predict where you are in the process. And it's very frustrating, and employers will just say, not interested in that candidate. So your questions matter, and we've got an entire section on developing those questions and what they need to look like. So let's talk about a good interview. The best interview you can have is conversational. It needs to be back and forth. Now, you don't want to disrupt if they've got an agenda that they need to get so many questions asked and answered. That is what it is. But we don't want it to just be rapid fire. They ask, you answer, they ask, you answer. You need to return fire with some good questions on your side. You're interviewing this company as well. It's a conversation. Am I a good fit for you? And what people forget is, are you a good fit for me? Because if you're not looking at that, what happens is you land a job and you're super happy and excited, and then you get there, and after the honeymoon period wears off, you're finding out that maybe I don't want to work here. This place kind of sucks. I've had one of those where I didn't interview the company very well. I thought I wanted to work there based on what I knew about the place, and it turned out I was very wrong. The culture was very, very bad for me, and it was one of the shortest term stays I've ever had at a company because of that. It was not a fit for me. And you need to make sure that the company you're interviewing with is a good fit for you. So here's what a good interview looks like. They ask a question, you give an answer. You ask a question, they give an answer. It has to be both ways, and we'll talk about how fitting it into any style of interview. And more importantly, they've prepared their questions. You need to prepare yours. And we'll talk about doing that. Throughout the course, we will talk about using stories. Storytelling is a great way for people to understand who you are and what you're about. But when I say stories, there's two things I want to make sure that are very clear. They need to be brief. You don't need to prattle on for 20 minutes at a time. And they need to be nonfiction. Do not make them up. Do not take what happened to somebody else and embellish it as though it was yours. Make it about you. This is the most selfish you have to be, is talking about you in the interview. That's what the interviewer wants, is for you to talk about you. So talk about you, and don't use fiction. Don't make it up. So in conclusion, you now know that your questions are going to matter in order to build a good conversation through a good interview process. So now you know that the questions matter. We're going to talk about later on in a later section how to build those questions, how to time them into the interview. This is just to get your feet grounded into what's coming in the course. So your action item is to make sure you don't get eliminated or after hired terminated. I want you to go check your resume. Have somebody else check your resume also. Look for grammar and spelling mistakes, and just don't get eliminated from the application process, and then make sure that your resume is accurate. That you don't need to have things in there. Maybe you put them on there when you were young, trying to build up your resume because you didn't have as much to talk about. Build what's actually you. There's a lot of good out there, and you'll be surprised that this won't eliminate you from consideration as much as it could eliminate you from the position after you get hired.